Amelie stepped into the glittering mansion, her simple dress a sharp contrast to the diamonds and silk that surrounded her. The air smelled of expensive champagne and perfume, but instead of warmth, she was met with smirks. Thandiau's friends leaned close to each other, their whispers sharp enough to cut. "That's the plain one of them giggled, eyes sliding over Amelie like she didn't belong. Another smirked, calling her the useless sibling. Amelie tried to steady her breath, her fingers curling against her palm, but the sting of their laughter was hard to hide. She had come only to celebrate her sister, not to be a target. Yet, the cruelest cut came from her own mother. With a practiced smile, she brushed Amelie aside as if she were nothing more than a shameful shadow. Guests around them chuckled quietly, watching the scene like it was part of the evening's entertainment. Amelie's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let her tears fall where they could see. She stood there, surrounded by chandeliers and wealth, yet completely invisible in the eyes of the people who should have loved her most. Every laugh and every sneer pressed heavier on her heart, but she kept her silence, swallowing the ache that rose in her throat. She realized in that moment that this was not her party, not her family's embrace, and not her world. It was the party that was never meant for her. The clinking of glasses filled the hall as the lights dimmed and all eyes turned to Thandiau. She stood at the center of the room in a glittering gold dress, her smile wide as the spotlight shone only on her. Amelie sat quietly at the back, trying to melt into the shadows, hoping the night would pass without more whispers aimed her way. Thandiau raised her glass and began her speech, her voice smooth and proud. She thanked her friends, her business partners, even her distant cousins, her words dripping with sweetness. But then her tone shifted. With a sly glance toward the corner where Amelie sat, she said, "And of course, thank you to everyone who matters." The crowd clapped politely, and then, with a smirk curling at her lips, she added, "Well, almost everyone. Some of us just take up space. Some of us are jobless, useless, and living off scraps." For a moment, the room went still. Then laughter erupted, bouncing off the walls like cruel music. A man near the front shouted, "Shouldn't security show her out? She doesn't belong here." More laughter followed. Amelie's cheeks burned, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought the whole hall could hear it. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but it wouldn't go down. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them see her cry. Instead, she forced her lips into a cold, steady smile, though inside she was breaking into pieces. Every laugh felt like a slap. Every mocking glance was another knife twisting in her chest. She had grown up in this family, yet in this moment she was treated like a stranger who had wandered in by mistake. Her mother sat silently, not even raising a hand to stop the cruelty. That silence cut deeper than her sister's words. It was as if the woman who had given her life agreed she was nothing. Amelie gripped her small handbag tightly, her knuckles pale as she forced herself to stand. The glittering chandeliers above blurred through her unshed tears, and the scent of champagne suddenly turned sour in her nose. With every step toward the exit, the laughter behind her grew louder, chasing her like cruel echoes. She kept her back straight, her chin lifted, though her insides trembled. She would not give them the victory of seeing her run. When she finally reached the doors, she paused, her hand resting on the polished handle. For one last moment, she turned her head slightly, giving the room a smile that was colder than ice. It was not a smile of joy but of warning, though no one there understood it yet. Then she stepped out into the night, the noise of the party fading behind her. Alone in the dark, her tears finally spilled, but so did something else. A quiet fire sparked inside her chest. They had humiliated her in front of everyone, but one day soon, they would regret ever underestimating her. Amelie stepped out of the glowing mansion and into the cool Lagos night. The sound of laughter still spilled from inside, cruel and sharp, as if the party was mocking her even when she was no longer in the room. She wrapped her arms around herself and started walking slowly down the long driveway lined with luxury cars, each one a reminder of the family that never once saw her worth. Her heels clicked against the stones, steady but heavy, like each step carried the weight of years of rejection. Her phone suddenly buzzed in her hand. She thought about ignoring it, but something inside told her to look. It was a series of messages from the family's business lawyers, names she knew but rarely heard from. She opened them one by one, her eyes widening as the words sank in. Her late grandfather, the only one who ever showed her kindness, had quietly left her something after his death. Not just a token gift, not something small to keep her silent, but a true stake in the empire. $19 million worth of power, signed and sealed in her name. Amelie stopped walking and let out a shaky breath. For a moment she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All these years, her family mocked her as useless, yet in her hands was a piece of their entire fortune. A piece so powerful it could shake the ground they stood on. She looked back at the mansion glowing behind her, full of the people who had just humiliated her, and her heart hardened like stone. They had treated her as less than nothing. Tonight, they had pushed her past the edge. And now she had a weapon they never saw coming. Her grandfather's voice came back to her in memory, the way he used to call her his silent fighter. He had believed in her when no one else did, and now she understood why he left this gift to her and not to anyone else. He had seen the strength she didn't yet know she had. Standing there on the quiet street, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her mind no longer clouded with sadness but sharp with clarity. They thought she would walk away defeated, but tonight would be the start of something they could never imagine. Amelie took a deep breath and lifted her chin. She was done being their shadow. She was done swallowing insults. If they saw her as worthless, then she would show them how dangerous, worthless, could be. With each step she took away from the mansion, her plan grew louder in her mind. She didn't need to scream or fight with words. Her silence would speak through power and control. And for the first time in her life, she felt a fire burning inside her, a fire too strong to put out. They had written her off as nothing, but she was about to prove she was everything. Amelie sat on the edge of her bed, the night outside heavy and still. The humiliation from the party replayed in her mind like a cruel movie she couldn't turn off. But instead of tears, there was now only fire in her chest. She reached for her phone, her hand steady, her voice calm. This was not a night for crying. This was a night for action. She dialed her banker first. The man on the other end was surprised to hear from her at such a late hour, but when she spoke, her tone left no room for questions. She gave her instructions clearly: every account tied to her shares in the family empire must be frozen immediately. Not tomorrow, not in the morning, tonight. He hesitated, asking if she was sure, and she simply replied, "Do it." Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of finality. Next, she called the corporate lawyers who managed her late grandfather's inheritance. One by one, she confirmed the power she held in writing. The papers were in her name. The authority was hers alone. And with that authority, she told them to block access to every stream of money connected to her family. No salaries, no credit card payments, no transfers, no luxury car installments. Every single channel of wealth they depended on was locked down under her order. It was as if she had pulled a lever that would stop the entire engine of their empire from turning. When she finally put her phone down, the silence in her small apartment felt almost holy. She sat there in the dark, her heart calm, listening to the city hum outside. Somewhere across town, her family was likely still celebrating, drinking and laughing under chandeliers, secure in the belief that their wealth made them untouchable. They had no idea that their empire was already crumbling in the background. They had no idea that their useless daughter had just pressed a button that would make their world collapse by morning. Amelie leaned back against the wall, her face expressionless but her eyes glowing with quiet determination. This was not revenge fueled by rage. It was justice. It was balance. For years she had been silenced, mocked, and pushed aside, treated as if she brought shame to their name. Tonight she had spoken in the only language her family truly understood: power. And it was only the beginning. As the hours crept toward dawn, she imagined the moment they would wake up to the shock. Her sister swiping her card only to be declined. Her father's business partners calling in anger. The servants refusing to work without pay. Amelie pictured the confusion, the panic, the disbelief. She almost smiled, not out of cruelty, but because finally, for once in her life, she was the one in control. While her family slept soundly in their mansion, the empire they worshipped had already been placed in her hands, and they would soon learn that the useless one was the most dangerous of them all. The morning sun poured into the mansion's wide glass windows, bouncing off the gold frames and polished marble. Breakfast was always a grand affair in the family home, with servants carrying trays of fresh fruit, bread, and steaming tea. Thandai strutted into the room in her silk robe, her phone in hand, already shopping online for her next designer bag. With a satisfied smirk, she typed in her card details, ready to spend like she always did. But instead of confirmation, her screen flashed, payment declined. She blinked, confused, and tried again. Once more, declined. Her face twisted with irritation. This must be a mistake, she muttered, refreshing the page as her parents glanced up from their newspapers. Before she could complain further, the phone in her father's hand rang sharply. On the other end was his luxury car dealer, shouting angrily about a bounced payment. "What do you mean declined?" her father snapped, his face reddening as he stood up from the table. "Run it again." But the dealer insisted the money had not gone through, demanding answers. At that same moment, another phone on the table buzzed with message after message. The head of staff was writing to say that none of the employees had received their salaries. By the time the second cook and the housekeepers confirmed the same, whispers spread through the mansion halls. Some staff had already packed up their belongings, refusing to work another hour without pay. The family sat at the long dining table, once a symbol of their power, now filled with tension and rising panic. Thandai slammed her phone down, shouting, "What is happening?" Her mother clutched her pearls, muttering prayers under her breath. Her father barked orders at the butler, demanding answers he could not give. For the first time in years, silence filled the space where laughter and arrogance usually lived. The smell of breakfast felt heavy, untouched, as fear began to replace hunger. Then, as if the universe itself was ready to deliver the final blow, all their phones buzzed at once. The notification was clear, impossible to ignore. The email came directly from the lawyers managing the family empire. The subject line alone sent a chill down their spines: notice of account freeze. Together, they opened it, eyes widening as they read the words that shattered their world. Every account tied to the empire was frozen under legal authority. And at the bottom, signed in confidence, was the name they least expected, Amelie. For a moment, no one spoke. Thandai's mouth fell open, her scream caught in her throat. Her father's hands shook as he gripped the paper beside him. It was not a system error. It was not a bank glitch. It was deliberate. The useless sibling, the one they mocked and humiliated just hours before, had pulled the strings in silence. And now the empire they thought would last forever was falling apart, not by an enemy's hand, but by the daughter they had never believed in. The call came before noon. Thandai's voice was shrill, her words tumbling over each other with anger and desperation. Their father's tone was harsher, commanding Amelie to come to the mansion immediately. For years, they had ignored her, spoken to her like she was less than family, but today their voices carried panic they could not hide. Amelie listened quietly, then ended the call without a single promise. If they wanted her presence, they would get it, but not the way they imagined. When she finally arrived at the mansion later that afternoon, she was not the plain, quiet Amelie they were used to dismissing. She stepped out of the car in a sharp black power suit, her heels clicking confidently against the driveway. The same people who laughed at her the night before now stared through the windows, waiting in unease. She walked into the grand hall where her family had gathered, their faces red with frustration, their voices rising in arguments that went silent the moment she entered. For the first time, she was the one commanding the room without even speaking. Her father pointed at her angrily. "What have you done? Do you understand what chaos you've caused?" Thandai hissed, "You've ruined everything. Who do you think you are?" Amelie's lips curved into the faintest smile as she calmly set her handbag on the table, her movements unhurried. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady, each word slicing through the heavy silence. "I own part of this empire. Last night, you mocked me. You kicked out your shareholder." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Thandai's face drained of color, and their mother's hands trembled on her lap. Their father tried to argue, tried to call it nonsense, but before he could speak further, the family lawyers stepped forward. With calm precision, they placed documents on the table, each stamped and sealed with legal authority. Every page confirmed the truth Amelie had just spoken. She was not only a shareholder but one with undeniable power. The empire they thought belonged only to them had always carried her name too. The silence that followed was unlike anything the house had known. The arrogance that once filled the walls seemed to collapse into dust. Amelie sat down slowly, her posture strong, her eyes steady as they darted from one shocked face to the next. "You wanted me invisible," she said softly, "but I was never powerless." Her voice was not angry, not shouting, but firm in a way that no one could challenge. No one laughed this time. No one dared. The same family who once mocked her as useless now sat in front of her, stripped of their pride, forced to face the truth. For the first time, Amelie was not the shadow in the room. She was the storm they never saw coming, and the silence that followed was their admission of defeat. The room was still thick with shock when Amelie leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, almost unreadable. Her family sat frozen, their pride crumbling like sand. They thought the freeze was the end of her move, but Amelie was only getting started. She opened her folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Thandai snatched it up, her eyes scanning quickly before widening in horror. "No, you wouldn't," she whispered, her voice trembling. Their father grabbed the paper from her and read it aloud, his voice breaking. It was confirmation from her lawyers. Amelie was in the process of selling her $19 million stake. And not to them, not to family, but to their greatest rival in Johannesburg. The words dropped like a thunderclap. Years of empire building, years of power, of careful deals and reputation, they were about to shift into the hands of their enemies with one decision. Thandai leapt to her feet, her arrogance gone, replaced by desperation. "Amelie, please. You can't do this. You're destroying everything we've built." Her father's voice followed, low and heavy with pleading. "We may have been harsh, but we are family. This is not how family handles conflict. Let us fix this." Even their mother, who had brushed her aside for years, reached across the table, whispering, "Daughter, think carefully. We need you." But Amelie's face did not soften. Her eyes were sharp, her words colder than ice. "Need me? Last night I was useless. Last night I was jobless. Last night you wanted me gone. Well, now you will see what gone really means." Her calm tone cut deeper than shouting ever could. She stood slowly, adjusting her suit jacket, while her family looked on in panic, their voices rising, begging, bargaining. Thandai even fell to her knees, gripping her sister's hand, but Amelie gently pulled it away. "You laughed at me when I was weak. Now you beg because I am strong." Her lawyers confirmed it again. The contracts were almost finalized. By the next sunrise, the rival company in Johannesburg would hold the power her family thought was untouchable. Everything they had worked for, every piece of wealth they had flaunted, would slip from their grasp into the hands of those who had waited for this moment. Amelie turned toward the door, her heels echoing across the marble floor like the closing of a chapter. Her father called her name, her mother sobbed, and Thandai screamed in anger and despair, but Amelie never looked back. At the doorway she paused, her voice calm but filled with steel. You wanted me invisible. You wanted me worthless. But you forgot one thing, I was always holding the knife that could cut you down. Then she walked out, her head high, leaving behind not just a family but an empire on the edge of ruin. In their desperate faces, Amelie saw the truth at last, the power they once used to crush her was now completely in her hands. Amelie stepped out of the mansion gates, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Behind her, she could still hear the faint sounds of chaos, her sister's screams, her father's angry shouts, her mother's cries, but she didn't turn back. For the first time in her life, their noise no longer held power over her. The night air felt cool against her skin, refreshing, almost like freedom itself was wrapping around her shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she stopped to glance at the screen. A single notification appeared, glowing brighter than any diamond her family had ever flaunted. The bank had confirmed it, the sale of her $19 million stake was complete. Her account balance shimmered with more than money, it shimmered with independence. She stood still for a moment, her chest rising and falling as she let the reality sink in. All her life she had been told she was nothing, that she was a shadow, an embarrassment, a useless sibling. Tonight, she had turned their insults into her weapon. With a quiet strength, she whispered into the night, useless? Not anymore. The words didn't need an audience. They were for her, and for the memory of her grandfather who had believed in her when no one else did. As she walked away, each step felt lighter, stronger, freer. Behind those mansion walls, the empire was already crumbling, staff leaving, business partners demanding answers, rivals circling like sharks. But Amelie didn't need to see it fall with her own eyes. She had already won. She didn't just take her power back, she created a new beginning. And as the city lights stretched out before her, Amelie knew this was only the start of the life she was always meant to live.